Chapter 89, The Web. The Web. Frithia awoke and stretched, enjoying the feeling of awaking in a bed that was not damp, or too short, or on the edge of a fathomless precipice. Enjoying even more the feeling of opening her eyes without that accompanying pain, so intense it felt it would split her head in two. There was something to be said for sobriety. Tired as she had been, she had merely stripped to her underwear the night before and slept in that, and she was intrigued to find that Odelin's illusion extended to their belongings as well. As she rooted through her bag, her clothes changed in style and color. She drew out what had once likely been her blue woolen jacket, now a sleeveless jerkin of moss green hide, the row of close metal buttons down the front glinting softly. She should really wear something under it, but it looked nice as it was, fitting like a second skin over her waist and hips, parting at her stomach to show a hint of dark flesh before her loose black trousers started, the collar short, stiff, and slightly fanned, giving her neck a long and supple look. She was wearing less than she usually slept in, but the body in the mirror was not her body, not even her face, and Frithia felt quite detached as she joined her friends in their common room and together moved down to the tavern. Breakfast was an awkward affair. The food was an unfamiliar mix of fungi, pickled meats, and freshwater mollusks. She was not sure whether the others had continued talking after she had retired, but no one was speaking outside of requests for dishes, and Frithia was quite pleased when the hour came for them to depart, if only to break the tedium of the thing. Outside the market was quieter than before, but still busy considering the hour, and there were a few to witness their passing. Frithia was not so concerned anyway. Jahara and Anoman knew what they were doing, and Valigar's personality seemed to subscribe itself quite well to that of a drow. Minsk knew enough to keep quiet, and Imoen just stayed close to Jahara, the older woman watching over her as she had always done. But, of all of them, the one who really impressed her was Ari. The girl had truly taken her words to heart and was swaggering about the city as though she owned the place, Herr Dallas catering to her every whim as she sneered lecherously at any male who passed. Solafane was awaiting them just where he had said he would be, on the edge of the marketplace next to the main gates, the man wearing that familiar low-browed frown as though he was having permanent trouble fathoming his surroundings. A woman was standing behind him surveying the area with the haughty, fractious expression that reminded Frithia of Jahara on a bad day, something the rest of the market seemed to have noticed as well, everyone giving the pair a wide berth as their group approached, Solafane stepping forward as they finally reached them.
"So, you have arrived, and in a timely enough manner."
Frithia said nothing. They were, in fact, early, and she had made sure of it.
"Good. You will find your time here will be less unpleasant if you continue in this vein."
He turned to the scowling woman next to him, his head slightly bowed as he offered,
"Handmaiden, this is Vuldran of Chednasad." "Is it now?"
Two red eyes turned to regard her critically, and Frithia dropped her attention deferentially to the priestess's throat, listening as the face above twisted with a disdainful sneer.
"So, Vuldran, is it? You may have come here under the banner of House Dispana, female, but you still have no place until the matron mothers decide otherwise. However, the Spider Queen has smiled upon you, for you are to be given a chance to prove your worth. Cling to that soul hope, worms, and do not fail."
Frithia raised her face as she sensed the woman's gaze, at last, shift from her, the handmaiden turning back to Solafane to bark,
"Explain what has occurred, male, and be quick about it, the Spider Queen demands my attentions." "At once, handmaiden." "Vuldran, one of the matron mother's daughters, in fact, a daughter of the very house that brought you here, ran afoul of devourers while out scouting. Her fool companions either fled or were slaughtered and she was taken captive. The Illithids know a prize when they have won. They will take her to their city and, should they reach it, she shall be lost forever and many secrets of Ustnatha will be in the hands of our enemies. We will intercept the devourers before this can happen." Handmaiden Imre has given us a blessed icon of Lolth with that will pull them from their astral travel, and it is there we will strike. Have you any questions?
Fritha met the stern gaze he sent her quite unwaveringly.
None.
Solifane nodded.
Then we go.
The place where Solifane had planned their ambush was a couple of hours from the city, the way familiar enough, at first, though that was soon no longer the case as they headed further south. Well, Fritha assumed it was south. It was difficult to keep her bearings down there, and she felt getting her compass out might have been a bit of a giveaway. They had reached their destination not long ago, a rocky plain, the ground slick with algae fed by the water that was dripping from above to slowly collect in rivulets and join the small river that was cutting through the rock beside them. Their group was gathered on the edge of the clearing, half concealed behind a pile of boulders that had been shaken from the cliff behind them by the last earth tremor, their flaky, cracked surfaces still free of the algae that covered the rest of the floor, she and Solifane a little way from the others as they waited for the time to strike. Solifane glanced to the female at his side, the girl watching a spotted ore lizard watch her from a nearby rock. Feyre had been predictably guarded with the details of her new ally, but rumors traveled far and fast in the darkness, and the man had heard enough to gather she was fleeing her own city with more than a little blood on her hands, and most of it from her own house. A female ruthless enough to have betrayed her own people, and sharp enough to get away relatively unscathed, he could see why Feyre was so pleased with her prize. Solifane could not say he had given much thought as to what she would be like, though the reality of it had surprised him. All the same, the girl not even 2 centuries old by her appearance, though she carried herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her face fair and made all the more pleasing in that it was not constantly marred by frown or sneer, her expression decidedly neutral as she waited silently beside him. The lizard had seemingly gleaned all it wished to, scuttling into a fissure to disappear, and Valdrin turned back to find him watching her.
What is it, male?
She questioned, though her voice lacked the usual animosity which accompanied that title. He shrugged indifferently, he owed her no deference after all.
Merely that you are younger than I would have presumed. You had an idea of what to expect. There have been rumors, you are not as I would have expected from your reputation.
This seemed to amuse her, a smile quirking her lips as she confirmed,
Oh really? And just what did you expect? Well, from what you did before you were forced to flee here, I would have at least expected a female who would be more eager to prove herself, rather than meekly following the orders of a mere male.
He had meant to rile her, just a quick snipe to remind the girl of just who was in command, but Valdrin merely snorted.
So, you expected someone filled with a zealous temper? Who storms and rages over this petty insult and that trivial slight?
The girl turned her head with a delicate disdain.
Such rashness fulfills no purpose. I keep my passions measured and achieve my ends by cooler means. I see,
he said eventually, wondering vaguely if Feyre would be disappointed.
So, the preparations you spoke of yesterday,
Valdrin continued,
what has the armies of your cities so occupied? They are gathering for an attack on the hated surfacer elves, and their settlement not far from here, perhaps you know of it? It is named Suldaneseller in their tongue. Such a feat would usually be impossible, but recent alliances have allowed us a rare opportunity to spill this blood in the glory of Lolth's name. And rarer still, how it all came about, the way provided by 2 surfacers of plans and wickedness even to please the Spider Queen, though they departed the city days ago now.
Valdrin's eyes were wide, her face lit with an angry shock.
What?
Solifane smiled at her predictable prejudice.
I see you may keep temper in check, but still balk at working with surfacers.
The girl shook back her hair, her expression neutral once more as she turned from him.
I am unused to such things, yes, but anything that leads to power and the glory of House and Lolth,
she shrugged, indicating all was well by her. Soliphane nodded.
A wise attitude in these changing times. But enough talk, I sense the Illithids are coming within range.
He threw a cursory glance to those gathered behind them.
Be ready, all of you. The icon will suppress their shinix, but they are still a dangerous foe. Failure is death. Your motivational speeches could use work, mate,
muttered Imoen as he moved away, raising above his head the small carved spider he had just brought from his bag. All at once the air began to thrum, the group hurrying to assemble before the boulders, drawing weapons in the tense silence that had engulfed them. The icon was glowing, lighting the cavern about them in blue, Frithha wincing at light that would have once been a joy to see. A sudden flash and they were before them, a company of 6 Illithids and their 2 Umber Hulk thralls, a slender black figure left to fall to the grounds beneath as battle erupted. Frithha ducked, thrusting her sword up through the creature's long torso, its hide robes affording it little protection, and the girl was already past it, racing to the unconscious Feyre before the woman was trampled. It seemed Soliphane had had the same idea as she, the drow fighting his way towards her as well, the others scattered about them similarly engaged, one Umber Hulk already on its back, Minsk stabbing through the soft underside with a triumphant roar. Their defeat was imminent, and one of the Illithids had turned on Feyre, leaning over her supine body as though savoring the moment before it struck. Frithha and Soliphane arrived together, Frithha's foot colliding with the Illithid's hard stomach to send the creature staggering back, Soliphane already crouched and checking the woman behind her. The Illithid hissed, lunging toward her, Frithha swinging out to scatter tentacles in a spray of milky of white blood. Bulbous opaque eyes wide with pain, its gaping maw now exposed and dripping with its own blood, the ring of teeth closing upon her as the creature lunged to latch onto her face.
Get down!
Came Ares' scream and Frithha ducked on instinct, a spell ripping overhead to strike it, the creature screeching as blue flames swallowed its long body, flesh bubbling like melting rubber. It dropped sideways, just a charred soup, and the woman behind her finally began to stir. Soliphane had already retreated back to a respectful distance and Frithha did the same, the gracile woman picking herself up from where she had fallen, her long, proud face scanning about her, taking stock of her rescuers. Gratitude was not forthcoming.
It is about time,
she huffed, dusting herself off with a graceful hand.
I was beginning to think they would reach their city after all.
Soliphane merely bowed.
Greetings, Feyre, daughter of Argelis. I trust you are uninjured. Soliphane? So the matron mothers sent you, did they?
The air warmed with her throaty laugh.
How it must gall. I did as I was commanded. Yes, as any male should,
the woman nodded, eyes finally leaving him to scan the rest of them, the icy blue gaze instantly fixing on Frithha.
But who is this with you? Could it be Vuldrin of Chednusod?
Soliphane was quick with the answer.
That is. I am sure she can speak for herself, male.
Snapped Feyre. Frithha dipped her head in a bow.
That is so, I am Vuldrin.
A smile was curling Feyre's lips, it looked hungry.
Indeed. Well, Vuldrin, we shall have to speak more, you and I, once we are back in the city. I shall head back now and inform the matron mothers of events. You are going to return alone?
Cried Soliphane, seemingly before he could stop himself.
What if you encounter danger once again? I shall not be responsible for.
Feyre cut him dead with a look.
It is my choice and my command, do not question it again. Farewell, Vuldrin.
Soliphane waited until she was a good distance away before venting his bile, the man looking as though he just stopped himself, throwing the icon to the ground in his temper.
Arrogant wench! I shall follow her back to the city to ensure her overconfidence does not endanger us all. Return to the city as you will.
And with that, he stalked off too. Imoen snorted.
These drow are all a bit tempestuous, aren't they?
Valigar frowned at her flippancy.
I hope you find it as amusing when they are demanding your death for some unknown slight. Ha! Vuldrin will sort them for me, won't you, Vuldrin?
But Fritha, it seemed, was struggling with emotions of her own now. She was finally free to vent them, the girl looking almost wild as she hissed into the blackness above.
That silver-scaled bitch!
They made their way back to the city without incident, their rangers' skills still sound, even in so alien a place. Fritha sent the majority of them back to the inn as soon as they had passed the gates, she and Jahara moving about the marketplace, picking up any extra equipment and maps they might need. Everyone agreed that they should always be ready for a swift exit should the need suddenly arise. Fritha had been seething about Adeline and her betrayal ever since Solafane had left them, and had seemingly not finished yet, muttering fiercely under her breath as they pushed through the crowds.
I cannot believe she tricked us like this. She knew those two had already left and now we're stuck in here with her holding a sword over our heads.
Jahara had, as usual, taken up the mantle of peacemaker.
Consider, Vuldrin, she may not have known and she is desperate. Oh, well, that's all right then, it's not as though we're in any rush, after all. She knew all right, that duplicitous, deceitful, if you wish to keep your eyes, slave, I suggest you turn them elsewhere.
Fritha snapped, the drow slave who had been busy stacking crates next to one of the stalls hurriedly returning to his work.
Vuldrin, calm your... I will not be calm.
Fritha hissed, whirling to stalk off and colliding with the short man behind her.
Watch your step, male. Your pardon, honored female,
he began hastily, his bow not quite hiding the curious glance he made to her face, and, for an instant, Fritha just stared back at him, his plain features framed on either side by straight jaw-length hair, before she realized his impudence, a hand at her sword hilt and he quickly lowered his eyes, stooping for the purchases she had dropped.
Here, mistress, you have many maps,
he considered, as he passed them back to her, a furtive little smiling suddenly pulling at his lips that Fritha did not like the look of.
You are new to our city? Perhaps, then, I have a business proposal for you. I am Jehind Fiend, a merchant of this city. And you are... busy.
Snapped Fritha, turning on her heel to stalk off, and cursing prolifically just as soon as she was out of earshot.
Bastard, bastard, bastard! We do not need any more members of this city taking an interest in us.
Jahara frowned, shooting a wary glance behind her to where the male was still watching their retreating backs with an open smile.
There is a shrewdness to his eyes, he knows something. What will you do? Do? What can I do? We will carry on as planned, with any luck we'll be well away before he can stir up any trouble. Oh, Gonador slime-covered arse, what now?
Fritha hissed, the door before her opening on a scene of yet more trouble and one centered on their table. A tall and rather broad female, her creamy hair gathered back in two long braids, was standing in their small corner of the tavern screeching threats about grudges and handmaidens to an equally furious, but thankfully silent, Anomen. It was a show that had drawn quite a few spectators, everyone in there eagerly watching the drama play out, males letting narrowed eyes shift slyly from their drinks, while the females looked on with open amusement. Of her own group, only Imoen and Valigar were about, the pair standing helplessly on the other side of the table, clearly unsure whether or not to step in, rushing to the aid of others not exactly a popular trait among the drow. Indeed, Solafane was nearby, too, and watching the proceedings with a mild interest. Fritha cast her eyes heavenward to gods that were now even further away.
One day, just one bloody day. The handmaidens will hear of this insult, male worm. Your insolent tongue will be torn from your mouth, so you cannot even beg for mercy as they.
Soliphane let her tirade wash over him. He had heard it all before and from far more imposing sources than Elidri, the fifth daughter of the almost insignificant House V. Holdrel. It was an unfortunate situation the male had found himself in, propositioned by a female of low rank and not exactly physical significance either, with her broad shoulders and unsculpted face. He and his group had clearly been people of rank in their native city before their forced departure, the male likely used to the attentions of more advantageous females. The blurted way he had made his appalled refusal showed Soliphane as much. It must have been galling to be there in that city with no status, no house, little better than slaves, and Soliphane wondered who had truly found the situation more insulting, she or him. He glanced up at the sweep of the doors, Vuldrin appearing at the mouth with her attendant, Yves, the girl sending a look of pure frustration to the high ceiling above her before she was stalking down the tavern's central aisle towards them, fine white hair billowing out behind her like the mists that often wreathed the lower Hazard River.
What is going on here?
She snapped, the male of her company utterly ignored as she squared up to the taller woman. Elidri's face twisted with a sneer as she finally found someone worthy of her ire.
Your male insulted me.
Vuldrin raised an eyebrow, at last turning to look at the male who had been the cause of all this trouble.
Did he now? Yes. He refused my company in the lust chambers.
Soliphane watched the pair along with the rest of the tavern. There was a simple way to resolve this, of course. Just order the male off with Elidri and let the woman vent her temper upon him as she took her pleasure. But as her reputation suggested, Vuldrin clearly eschewed the easy path and she did not seem to like backing down much either. She sent the male next to her a measured smile.
Well, Tan, it seems you are not as foolish as you look. He is my male and as such, under orders to report only to me. Had you come to me with tithes and requests, I may have heard you, but...
Vuldrin went to turn her back on her, the affront as blatant as her dismissal, and it was an insult Elidri was not to take without protest, hands flying to the long dagger at her hip.
How dare!
It all happened very quickly. Vuldrin darted to the side with an agility that few could have matched and reached back, grabbing the hand that held the knife for her, a foot sliding out to trip the woman, and they both went crashing into the table. Everyone danced backwards, himself included, as cups toppled to send black ale and wine pooling over the surface, Vuldrin's small frame on top of Elidri's and pinning her there, one hand about the wrist that still held the knife, while the other secured the woman's head, braids twined about her fist like ropes as she pressed the woman's face into the slick granite surface. Vuldrin let her struggle just long enough to realize the futility of it before she slowly leaned in, her voice little more than a whisper.
Now, when I release you, you will straighten, sheath your knife, we will drink a toast to Lolth and you will leave.
Another moment to let this sink in and Vuldrin stepped back, seemingly relaxed, though Soliphane could see the tension in her shoulders, ready for any retaliation. Elidri had lost her taste for retribution though, the woman straightening unsteadily to sheath her blade and accept the cup that Vuldrin's companion, the young Haluo, passed to her, Vuldrin herself snatching another from the few still left on the table to raise it high, her smile brighter than the crystal lamps above them.
To the Spider Queen.
Elidri echoed her words, though far less passionately. Perhaps she did not want to bring Lolth's attention to her shame, the woman draining the cup and turning instantly to make her exit with a poisonous scowl and not another word, and about the tavern, heads finally swiveled back to their own tables. Vuldrin oversaw her departure with a steady gaze, perhaps ensuring she had truly left, before she turned and ordered the rest of her group back to their rooms, the girl herself sinking into a chair on the drier side of the table and smiling as Soliphane moved to join her.
You did not kill her,
he observed, and she smiled, teeth flashing in the low lights.
The dead don't know they've lost. She could cause trouble for you later.
But the girl just laughed.
Let her try, I will relish the entertainment of it. You are here looking for entertainment yourself. No,
he answered, his mood darkening in an instant.
Feyre has sent me here to relay her latest orders. Ah, another message from Feyre that sees the prize of the Male Fighters Society as little more than a herald. You and she share a history, do you not?
Cellophane felt his cheeks darken with an angry blush.
Yes, and one I have no intention of sharing with you. Orders.
Came a voice, the pair turning to see the server before them, his eyes set firmly upon the wrought metal tray he held.
You took the words from my mouth,
Vuldren laughed.
A black ale for me.
She glanced expectantly to Cellophane.
Nothing. One black ale,
the server repeated with a deferential nod, instantly disappearing off to the bar, Vuldren calling after him,
and send someone to clear this table. Yes, mistress.
Vuldren turned back to the man at her side.
And Feyre's orders for us.
Cellophane frowned.
To meet her outside Female Fighters Society tomorrow morning. She has another task for us.
He snorted crossly, his lack of information frustrating. Feyre knew 1,000 ways to torment him.
I have told you what she told me. You are to meet her tomorrow, I would suggest you are not late.
And with that, he rose and took his leave, the server passing him as he left, and Fritha took her drink from his tray, leaving him cleaning the now empty table as she returned to their suite upstairs. Imoen was already regaling the others with the tale of their meeting, Herr Dallas looking up at her entrance, a very familiar grin on that unfamiliar face.
My Raven! You are getting on well with the locals, I hear.
Fritha threw herself into the chair next to him with a smile.
Ah, you know me, always eager to make friends. If only our Anomen was the same, we wouldn't have had the trouble to start with.
The knight bristled.
You expected me to lie with that woman.
Imoen grinned.
Yeah, come on, Fritha, she was twice his size.
A round of muffled snickering from Imoen and Herr Dallas, even Fritha allowing herself a smile as she continued coolly.
I expect of you, Anomen, what I expect of everyone here, the maintenance of our illusion as drow. Right, has Jahara spoken to you about our meeting with that merchant?
A glanced to the druid to see her nod.
Good. Well, then you'll all know that the recovery of those eggs is even more pressing now, because as soon as someone finds out about us, we are all dead. I've just been speaking to Cellophane, and Feyre likely has a task for us tomorrow, so with that all in mind, tonight we are down in the tavern, blending in, and finding out anything we can about these eggs.
She glanced to Imoen.
Think of the Thieves' Guild only with less of you sodding it off and chasing boys.
The girl snorted darkly.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Anomen was still scowling.
And what do you expect us to do if we face any more?
He paused, as though he found the word distasteful.
Propositions.
Fritha stared back at him impassively, trying to picture the face behind the one he wore now. Truth be told, if the previous unpleasantness which had passed between them since the asylum had not happened, she would have likely lain with him there. There, where he did not look as himself and her own body was a stranger to her. Anomen seemed rattled by her silence.
Well.
Fritha sighed.
Send them over to me, I will make sure they change their minds. Violence will not dissuade everyone,
warned Jahara. Fritha gave a bark of spiteful laughter.
Who said anything about violence? I shall just tell them what a boring bastard he is. Fritha. Damn her black heart. Where is she?
Cellophane spat, casting another dark look up the tall building next to him as though it was its fault for not producing the woman. It was the next morning, he and Vuldren outside the Female Fighters Society as instructed with no sign as yet of Feyre. Cellophane bit back another curse, any longer and they would be late. He was quite sure she had said to meet her outside the society building and did not doubt his own recollection of the fact, but the woman was known for her petty spite, especially where he was concerned. She could well be over at the main gates now, reveling in yet another humiliation. But he would have to leave there to confirm it and risk missing her arrival. The indecision was making him agitated, the complete opposite of the woman he was waiting with. Vuldren leant back against the wall of the building, cleaning under her nails and looking thoroughly bored. Cellophane felt his patience snap.
Stay here, I am going to see if she has changed the meeting place without informing us.
Vuldren straightened with a sigh.
Well, at least let us establish whether she is here or not.
And before he could say either way, she had leaned over to pound on the door next to her, a male slave appearing in the mouth but an instant later.
Yes, mistress.
Vuldren was, as ever, straight to business.
I'm looking for Feyre. Has she left yet this morning? No, mistress, I believe she is still in her chambers.
Vuldren glanced to him with an impassive shrug.
There you go.
She turned back to the slave.
You will show us up.
Cellophane just stifled his bark of no. If Feyre took offense, then it was all this foreigner's idea, after all, and he had a feeling Vuldren knew how insolent she was being, the girl testing the ground with her new mistress, seeing what she could get away with, what would earn her a swift reprimand, and he could have found her fearlessness quite attractive had it not put a dagger at his own throat, as well. They were admitted without a word, their passage strangely quiet, the echo of their footsteps barely a whisper in the air as the slave led them across the stone entrance hall to the dark mouth of the stairwell. The building was in the traditional layout of the city, the narrow curved staircase coiling up the outside wall, doorways occasionally opening onto the corridors and rooms layered within. The hour was still early enough to find the majority of the rooms they passed empty, and those they did see paid them little obvious attention, a few of the women glancing up as they ascended past the entrance to the large training hall. They followed the slave right up to the 7th and final floor before he stopped, moving to knock tentatively on the smooth grey door that now blocked their path.
Enter,
came the murmur from inside, the slave disappearing around the door to venture,
Mistress, Cellophane and a female are here to see you. Truly? Show them in.
The slave did as he was told, opening the door for them both and closing it behind them, seemingly glad to have the whole thing over with. Their trial, though, was just beginning. Fritha let her eyes quickly travel the room. It was quite large and decorated in the same style as her own at the inn, albeit far more lavishly, all twisting metal and polished stonework. In the far corner was set a fire pit, though it was absent of the curling blue flames, the floor about it surrounded by an opulent scattering of silk cushions and purples and greys, a rack of exotic weapons and an armor stand the only other furniture. Another 2 doorways led from that main room, Feyre herself watching them from the one just to the left, presumably the entrance to her bedchamber, since she was wearing only a diaphanous grey slip, a short well-muscled male sitting on the bed still finding his clothes in the room behind her.
Vuldren and Cellophane,
Feyre purred, seemingly pleased to have been discovered so.
Is it so late already? I fear I lost track of the time.
The male was finally dressed, at least by Drow standards, Feyre catching a thick bicep as he made to pass her, and Fritha watched dispassionately as the woman caught him in a long lingering kiss that seemed entirely for their benefit. finally drawing back only to slap him sharply across the face. But the male did not seem offended, and they smiled broadly at each other before he turned and swaggered out, the man giving Fritha a grin as he passed.
Now, Solafane and, of course, Vuldren.
Feyre smiled, pausing to see Solafane's reaction, though he did not oblige her, and she continued skillfully.
I am pleased to be able to at last greet the one who so valiantly rescued me from those filthy devourers.
That baited him well enough.
Ah, I must have been absent during that encounter,
the man muttered sourly. Feyre's face twisted with a delighted frown.
I was speaking to Vuldren. When I speak to you, Solafane, it will be a command to lick my boot. Ignore your emasculated commander's outburst, Vuldren. I will tell you now, the matron mothers are delighted that House Despanna gave you a place here. My own mother, Matron Argillis, can see already it was as I said, that you will grow to be a valuable asset to our house. In fact, so pleased was Matron Argillis with your performance, it seems you and Solafane are to be entrusted with another task for the good of the city.
Solafane snorted.
I was not aware Matron Argillis did anything for the good of the city. Silence.
Feyre barked. It seemed she did not like his remarks as much when it had not been herself who had provoked them, her manner still brusque as she returned her attention to Fritha.
There is a crate arriving at the docks within the hour, you are to meet with the spelljammer it is arriving on, oversee its safe delivery and guard the crate until the acolytes arrive and dismiss you.
She leaned in slightly, icy blue eyes almost lost under the threatening frown.
Under no circumstances are you to open the crate.
But Solafane was staring back at her with a scowl of his own.
And what is so important that it requires us as guards? What is this delivery? Do not ask questions, male. You are dismissed. Vuldren will join you when we have finished speaking.
Solafane sighed tersely, already turned to leave.
Fine, I will await you outside.
Fritha nodded, but said nothing. Feyre smiled as soon as the door clicked shut, moving to return to her bedroom and beckoning Fritha after her. The room was decorated similarly to the first, a large unmade bed dominating the space, Feyre sinking back to sit on it and making no offer to Fritha of a seat as she continued.
Ah, Vuldren, at last we meet face to face. I took a great risk in securing you a place here, it is a debt I expect to be repaid in full. I am here to serve.
Feyre smiled knowingly, eyes hard and calculating behind the gesture.
Yes, just as you were to your last house? I am curious, Vuldren. You had standing in Chednusad. The Master of Arms is a strong position for one who is not of the house's direct line. You had power and favor, yet you betrayed your matron.
Fritha worked to keep her feet still, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with this line of questioning.
I suppose it could be seen as such. You suppose?
Feyre laughed throatily.
You assassinated her 2 elder daughters.
Fritha felt her eyes widen, her heart's pace quickening. It was all very well bluffing your way through a scene, but only if your audience didn't already have the script. Feyre took her alarm for surprise though.
You are shocked I know the details of your flight? Come now, Vuldren, I would hardly accept your offer without doing a few inquiries into the terms of your disgrace. If nothing else, it could have been useful in assuring your otherwise potentially capricious loyalties. If you already know the details of my actions, then why ask me of it further?
Fritha muttered sullenly, doing what she felt was a rather good impression of Solafane. But Feyre was not to be deterred.
I know that you killed them, I do not know the circumstances.
Fritha did not even dare to swallow, all her fears and that nerve-tearing strain expressed in only her sulky frown as she let her mind slip back to the archives and that dusty old book with the, in actual fact, very dull woodcuts.
I had a position, yes, and it allowed me to see what others could not. Our matron mother was weak, our house was stagnating under her rule when we should have been rising to glory. It would only be a matter of time before one of the other houses noticed the same and sealed our downfall. I alone understood this and I alone dared to act. Our matron held her eldest daughter in greatest favor, and it was that girl she was grooming for rule.
Fritha let a sneer curl her lip.
But she was insipid and weak like her mother, and I knew she would further lead our house to ruin. Her younger daughter was not from the same mold though. It was I who had trained her with the blade in her youth, and I knew the hunger that burned within her. Hunger yet proved when she came to me, asking me to assassinate her sister while she held counsel with her mother on some minor matter of the house as alibi. I did as she asked. I and my strongest warriors fought our way into the elder's chambers and slaughtered her. But the younger daughter's hunger was to be my undoing as well, for, but moments after the deed was done, she was standing in the chambers behind me, her own guard at her back and ready to murder me in vengeance for her sister, to win her mother's favor and keep my silence both. But though I did not expect her treachery, I did plan for it, and here I am while she lies dead.
You were tricked, Feyre pointed out with more than a little pleasure. Fritha shrugged.
No reward is without risk, I regret nothing.
Feyre smiled broadly, looking at her as though she had just discovered some wholly unexpected treasure, and Fritha at last felt her heart calm.
You speak boldly, Vuldren, perhaps we will have Chednusod regretting your departure yet, yes? As for now, you are still a foreigner in this city, so things are awkward for you, but I can arrange for you to broaden your company if you wish.
Feyre smiled eloquently, leaning back to stretch lithely on the crumpled sheets.
I know you travel with males, but it can become so tiresome with just the same few, and there are some men over at the Male Fighters Society who would be more than obliging. Like Solafane.
Feyre looked up sharply at that, for a moment furious, when she suddenly laughed.
I would have anyone else flogged for such calculated insolence, but it suits you too well.
Fritha smiled slightly too, taking the compliment as it was meant as the woman continued.
And let me assure you, he is not worth the effort. But I could arrange something with one of the more virile members. I thank you for the offer, though I believe, as a foreigner in this city, I have more important conquests to occupy me than the males I take to my bed.
The woman eyed her shrewdly from where she lay, slowly beginning to nod.
Wise, very wise. Your ambition is to be commended, though such focus is rare and something you'll find few here truly appreciate. But go now, return when the shipment is delivered.
Fritha smiled and dipped her head.
Yes, mistress.
Fritha had returned to the inn and collected the others, explaining to them their next undertaking. The task they had been given had been simple enough. Of course, it had been complicated some by the fact the crate began shaking violently on delivery, the crew dropping it at about halfway along the gangplank to retreat to a safe distance, Feyre's orders not to open it rather redundant when a huge beholder exploded from it in a hail of splintered wood. The spells that had been keeping it unconscious had apparently worn off early, and the creature had awoken from its rest enraged and extremely opposed to being delivered anywhere. The docks were in chaos, the beholder summoning magics and blasting anything that moved with its many eyes, a few drow falling to their deaths from the high walkways as the spelljammer tried to make a hurried exit, and their group had had little choice but to kill the creature. It had been to a background of grim faces that Solafane had sent word of this complication to Feyre, though an unconcerned message had arrived back not long afterwards, indicating no displeasure on her part, merely reminding them to guard the body until the acolytes arrived for it, and not to disturb the corpse. At last, the acolytes had arrived with a box of their own and they were relieved of their duty, Solafane still muttering to himself as he quit their company for the Male Fighters Society. As for their group, they had been given a day's leave as reward for their success. Anomen wondered if the women could have ever realized what a punishment such was. He was seated at their table in the busy tavern. The unfamiliar and wholly downcast faces of Valigar, Minsk, and Imoen sat about him as they drank in silence. Jahara and Fritha already retired for the evening. And the others, he considered as a sharp cry pulled her attention to the bar. Ari stood there glaring imperiously at the short man before her who was drawn back clutching his cheek, Herr Dallas watching the proceedings with a smirk. Well, some of them seemed to be enjoying it a bit too much. Anomen turned back to the table, keeping his eyes on his drink so as best to avoid any unwanted attention from the women that surrounded him, some seated as he was, drinking and talking, while others stood openly scanning the room for a potential match to take up to the lust chambers. That a place could be so dull and yet so tense was beyond his understanding, but that did not prevent Anomen from feeling the frustrations of being stuck there in that body, the desire to do something quivering inside him, anything that would bring them closer to finding those eggs and escaping that pit. He wished more than anything he could make his prayers and allow the calm they were ensured to bring him enter his heart, but Fritha had forbidden them, the girl not wanting to find out just how much power Lolth held down there in the seat of her veneration.
"Do you think we should be continuing our investigations?"
Came a voice he was finally beginning to recognize as Valigar, the cool inflection the same even with the change in tone. Anomen glanced up in time to see Imoen's despondent shrug, the girl taking another swig of ale.
"No one knew anything yesterday, why would they today? The man I spoke to was free enough with his words,"
continued the ranger,
"though he knew nothing of any surfacers passing through the city or even when the armies were planned to advance. The most he spoke of was when he found out we're working for Solafane and Dispana. He said the ties there used to be stronger, though he would not explain further, only that Argelis had not seen it as an advantage and all was resolved long ago."
Imoen snorted bitterly.
"Nothing's resolved between those two. Besides, you were lucky. I had some stuck-up sod harping on and on about this being the first city and the part Ustnatha played in the scattering and how there wouldn't even be a Chednasad without them, like I'd care."
Anomen took a mouthful of the bitter black beer, feeling better for this discussion and a chance to air his worries.
"What I cannot understand is, if the passage is now clear, why have the Drow not yet begun their attack? Adeline cannot stop them, after all." "I suppose we could ask,"
offered Imoen, casting about her contemplatively.
"We should not risk anything without Vuldren being here,"
warned Anomen.
"Since when do we need her permission? She is our leader, young Haluo,"
reminded Minsk sternly, surprising Anomen with his recollection of the alias,
"and well earned the title was." "I know,"
Imoen sighed, seemingly irritated by her own spite.
"I don't mean it like that, I just wish we were doing something, instead of just sitting here. We understand your frustrations, Boo himself is greatly tired of being kept always within the rooms. But we must trust in our leader." "Yeah, even though she barely trusts us, all right, Ilman, I know,"
Imoen added quickly as Minsk drew a breath to rebuke her.
"But Irenicus has already left the city and we're trapped here running errands for Feyre until we find those eggs. If we miss him again because of this..."
Imoen trailed off, looking worried and miserable. Valigar frowned.
"We will reach the city in time. Irenicus went to all this trouble to bring the elves' war for a reason. I suspect he hopes to use the cover of the attack as a distraction for him to find what he wants within Sol."
He stopped, eyes flicking pointedly to the doors, and Anomen turned to see Solafane stood just before them, scanning the room. His eyes found them, and, all at once, he was making for their table, Anomen watching his approach.
You,
the drow began, a no-man not even letting him finish his order.
My name is Tan.
He could see the amusement in the drow's eyes at this pointless defiance, though Solafane said only,
I have a message for your mistress. Fetch her here.
A no-man scowled, wishing he was in his own body, towering above him with the power of his god free at his disposal, and perhaps his anger showed on his face, for the drow raised an expectant eyebrow, a smile twitching his lips. A no-man forced himself to rise, turning to head for the stairs. The sooner they were out of that hole, the better. Fritha lay, her head turned to the side and resting on her crossed hands, her cheek rubbing against her teeth and tickling the inside of her mouth as the slave kneaded her back. The others may have hated being there, but Fritha could definitely see advantages to it. She had enjoyed a hot bath every night since arriving, and since she had gained Feyre's favor, even more benefits were making themselves apparent. Fritha sighed as the drow's strong fingers worked over her shoulders. The slave, one of Feyre's personal attendants, had arrived an hour or so ago, explaining he had been sent to entertain her for the next few hours as a reward for her services. The man setting up the narrow padded bench as Fritha had slipped behind her room's screen to strip and enfold herself in the fine grey silk wrap he had brought for her. She had never had a massage before, the mere feeling of being touched invoking a pleasant rush of sensations that were becoming increasingly rare, and her skin bristled as his fingers traveled further down her spine.
Are you cold, mistress? Should I? No, I am fine, merely enjoying myself.
She could hear the slave's smile.
I am glad, miss.
Fritha's head whipped up as the door before them banged open, the girl relaxing to rest her chin on her crooked elbow as she recognized the now slender form of a no-man, the surprise on his face soon giving way to contempt at the scene which greeted him.
I have an urgent summons, mistress,
he ground out, his slight pause of reluctance barely noticeable. Fritha sent him a cold look.
Indeed. Well, it must be urgent if you take it upon yourself to barge in here without even the courtesy of knocking. But do not worry, Tan, I shall not be so hasty later when administering your reprimand. Leave us.
She dismissed to the slave, the man passing a no-man, his lowered head by no means hiding his smirk. He knew how to behave. They waited until the door clicked shut before speaking again, a no-man wasting no time in venting his disapproval, the concern that lingered behind his tone merely annoying her further.
You take too much pleasure in this act.
Fritha smiled eloquently and adjusted the silk folds at her chest.
I do just enough to maintain my cover.
A no-man snorted.
Oh, yes, luxuriating yourself in this den of lusts. Luxuriating.
She giggled.
Has Herr Dallas been teaching you long words again? Now, what's this summons? That drow, Solafane, is downstairs asking for you. Alone. What?
Fritha sighed tersely.
I mean, has he any women with him? No,
snapped a no-man.
Fine, he can wait then, it would not do to seem too obliging. Send the slave back in on your way out, that is, unless you wish to finish his task for him.
A no-man did not look tempted. In fact, a no-man looked livid, but that was far more satisfying than any massage. The slave lavished his attentions upon her for another half an hour, finishing her massage with the intimation he would be more than willing to attend to other aches she may have had, but Fritha merely dismissed him with the excuse of being busy. She had been half tempted to, as well, a spit in the face of her previous romantic notions, one of the last few surviving remnants of her old self, and a part of her wanted to finally stop clinging pointlessly to whom she had been, to embrace this brokenness and accept the person she had become. Downstairs, Solafane informed her that Feyre wished to see her alone at her apartments, the man making no comment about his weight. Feyre, however, Frithha had to fight against recoiling a step, the woman stalking across the room as soon as the door was closed, her face lit with a fury which had enjoyed a long while to mature to its peak.
"Where, by Lolth, have you been?"
Frithha returned her anger with a cool look. This was going to hurt.
"I was indisposed, as I understood it, I was to be given a day's leave."
The hand swiped her brutally across the cheek, so hard Frithha could feel the heat under its sting.
"I will not hear excuses. You are here to serve my house, and when I summon you, I expect you to attend immediately." "Yes, mistress."
Feyre said nothing, just snorted, and Frithha watched her as she turned to stalk back across the room and pour herself some wine, knocking it back in one sharp mouthful. She was clearly agitated, and Frithha could see her twitching in her own skin, such a change from the cool, drawling woman who swaggered about the city so assured of her own power. Feyre glanced up from the cup, looking grave.
"The beholder you killed, Vuldren, it was not the right one. I have had a summons from my mother, Matron Argelis, she wishes to see you as well."
Frithha swallowed.
"When?" "Now."
The Temple of Lolth was in the center of the city, a huge hive of rare purple stone, many metal spires and buttresses sprouting from it, a great fat spider overseeing all from the middle of its web. Inside, it was a maze of corridors, guards, and handmaidens all going about on their own errands. Frithha had yet to see the main hall of worship, and she felt they had likely already passed it by. Two large doors had stood opposite the entrance, an intricate design of spiders and drow etched upon them in silver, and a guard standing either side. Feyre was leading the way, marching down the halls at a furious pace, finally pushing a door open on a circular chamber, a library by its look, racks of scrolls lining the curved walls. And there they waited for a good half hour, just knelt with heads bowed, Frithha tracing patterns with her eyes in the glittering mosaic that was underfoot. At last, the click of the door, the air stirring with the scent of incense as three people marched in, two wearing the intricate armored sandals of handmaidens, the one that followed, in deep purple robes, the sliver hems sweeping across the floor with a sigh. The clatter as the metal chair they had brought was set before them on the tiles, and then a voice, cold and quiet with anger, and Frithha watched Feyre's hands ball into fists to hide their tremble as Argelis began.
"So you have finally come. I wondered if you would have been too ashamed after such a glaring failure of your house. Indeed, I was just explaining to the other matrons why our plans are yet delayed." "Be but matron." "Silence, girl!"
snapped Argelis shrilly, her voice echoing gloriously in that stone chamber.
"Would you deal with a Drider again so soon? Explaining to the matrons why our armies are dormant, still awaiting their greatest ally? It is a question I should like to know the answer to as well."
And Feyre seemed more than desperate to provide her one.
"Matron, the spelljammer tyrant was supposed to be an elder. I swear that is what the slavers assured me." "Assured you? And you did not think to go and confirm such for yourself?"
Argelis snorted her contempt at the silence that answered her.
"I see. You are unworthy of the task I gave to you. Perhaps I should allow one of your sisters the responsibility in your stead. I know they all would be eager to take your place." "No, matron,"
came Feyre, her voice firmer now.
"I will get what is required, I just need time to locate it. You know what we face, with every day that passes the Silver One will become more desperate, so see that you find it quickly."
A pause to give time for her command and the threats that hung just beneath to sink in, and Frithha sensed the matron's gaze shift.
"So, who is this with you?" "The foreigner." "Matron, this is the female that I spoke to you of, Vuldrin of Chednusod. Is that not what I said?
Argelis snapped, and Fritha could feel her eyes boring into the top of her head.
I see nothing so special about her. You, girl. Vuldrin, is it? Come here.
A glance to Feyre, the woman nodding urgently, and Fritha rose, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on her chest as she moved to stand before the woman's chair, the two handmaidens either side shifting slightly.
So you are the one who Feyre so vouched for. I took a great risk in securing you a place here, girl. Those who betray their own matrons rarely find favor anywhere. Those who betray their matrons rarely live long enough to look.
Another slap to the face, the handmaiden quick to reward her insolence with a backhand vicious enough to jar her neck. Fritha could taste blood in her mouth, the old pain surfacing to join the new. She rather wished the priestess had hit the other cheek. It was no reflection of matron Argelis' displeasure though, the woman cackling spitefully.
Ha! A good answer. Now, Vuldrin, you have proven yourself competent by the rescue of my daughter, not that she warranted such efforts. This is good. House Despanna needs competence, a seemingly rare commodity, though I warn you now, make any move against my house and you will not live to boast of it to another city foolish enough to take you in. Now, both of you, get out of my sight.
It was not until they were outside that chamber and many corridors away that Feyre drew to a halt, the woman pulling her into a small side chamber with a feverish haste, her eyes intense with some inner light.
You know now, Vuldrin, what task rests upon our house, all the glory and power that lies ready for our grasp as House Despanna provides the city with its greatest ally in our upcoming attack upon the surface elves. But for that we need blood, the elder blood from one of the old races, that those slavers lied to me.
She snapped in a tone that spoke of lingering punishments, the woman continuing more to herself as she planned aloud,
I will need to contact my spies and find a new source for what we need. The warrens to the south may prove fruitful, but they will no doubt be heavily guarded.
Feyre glanced up, half surprised to find her there and smiling slightly as she did.
You did well this evening, Vuldrin, my mother is pleased by you. Return now to the inn, I will summon you again when I have need.
Fritha nodded once and dared, at last, to return her smile. That evening and Feyre's clear distress had blurred the divide between them, and they felt more now like allies than master and servant, though Fritha was not about to test the sensation, at least not yet.
Yes, mistress.
Outside and finally alone once more. Fritha breathed the sigh she had been holding back all evening, waiting until she was a good few streets from the temple before slipping into the shadow of a grey-domed building and gingerly touching her cheek, the skin tender and swollen, but still quite whole. The tongue behind her eyes clucked in sympathy. Poor lamb, I'm sure you'll be, behind you. Fritha whirled, a hand already on her sword, the man behind her looking rather surprised, still a good few yards away and hardly strident in his approach. Fritha felt her insides groan, it was that merchant from the marketplace, and she made no attempt to hide her displeasure as he closed to her.
What do you want? Why, to continue my proposal, honored female,
he smiled, falling into step with her and exuding more confidence than likely possessed by all the merchants in Ustnatha combined.
I hope you are no longer too busy for the discussion, Vuldrin of Chednusod.
So he had been asking after them. Fritha scowled, this was the last thing they needed.
You will address me as mistress or not at all? Of course, your pardon, honored female. You know, I have been thinking about you since we met in the marketplace.
Jahind continued suavely. Fritha snorted.
Oh really? I get that a lot.
His smile broadened to a grin.
I am sure you do. But offers such as mine come along but once in a lifetime. I have in my possession a rope of great magics that once belonged to the famed Jarlaxle Baldur. Oh, is that so? I hear the disbelief in your tone, honored female, so allow me to give the tale that proves my case. Jarlaxle was in the city on a mission for House Jaylat, helping them in their war against House Gillish. It was done in an orgy of blood to please even Lolth, but afterwards the matron of Jaylat refused to pay Jarlaxle, saying that services rendered to the Spider Queen should be payment enough. According to the tales, Jarlaxle simply bowed and left even as the gathered house mocked him and spread the story of his foolishness.
Frithha sighed loudly.
Scintillating though this tale is, what has it to do with your rope?
Jahind smiled, seemingly amused by her discourtesy.
Well, Jarlaxle enacted a plan of revenge, moving to acquire the ward stone that would allow him entrance into House Jaylat, so he could return their favor. But the ward stone is held by the Lich, Drex, an ancient ally of that house. The rope's magics would have protected Jarlaxle from the Lich, but I, swapped the real rope for a fake when his men visited my shop for supplies. Jarlaxle barely escaped with his life and the rogue laughed out of the city for the failure. And now you want me to buy the rope from you,
confirmed Frithha bluntly.
The rope you stole from the head of the Brigandierth, the elite mercenary band.
Jahind was quick to assuage her doubts.
Consider, honored female, there is nothing that links this rope to yourself and its powers are extensive. You could steal the wardstone yourself, loot the Lich's tower, even House Jaylat. Look upon it, mistress.
He breathed, reverently drawing a loop from his pack, the thin rope glowing like spun gold.
Oh, yes, very nice, I've one just like it.
Jahind blinked owlishly.
Truly, mistress? Yes, and the Sahuagin I took it from is in no state to demand its return either.
Jahind laughed, though he was not so easily swayed from his pitch.
But I warrant it is not as fine as this one. All the magics to breach even a Lich's lair, invisibly that cannot be dispelled, spell shields that cannot be breached, layer upon layer of protective magics, why you could smuggle a Rothe beast into the temple of Lolth. Enough,
snapped Frithha.
I could not be less interested, that rope is nothing more than a noose and I have no desire of it.
Jahind sighed.
Well, I can only accept your decision and hope you change your mind. Visit my shop just east of the marketplace if you do.
They had come to a halt at a crossroads next to a large platform, a chaos of people milling about, halfway through unloading the spelljammer that had docked there, the doxateer above clearly full. Jahind turned to her.
I suppose we are to part ways then,
he grinned,
unless there is anything else I might serve you in.
Frithha just suppressed an eye roll.
No, I prefer my males taller.
His smile took on a lecherous cast.
My skills more than make up for my stature.
Frithha snorted with a mild amusement.
Well, they would have to. But that is all by the by, I am tired and busy and quite bored enough of this discourse. I hope we will not meet again.
Frithha turned, taking the western walkway, more than pleased to leave him behind her, though her relief was cut short.
Vuldrin. I told you,
she snapped, whirling back only to stop, the unfamiliar forms of Anomen and Jahara appearing from the walkway to her east.
Oh, Tan, it is you and Yves, as well. Why are you here?
Frithha could see the anxiety to their eyes even if their words remained decidedly neutral, Jahara offering coolly,
You were long in your meeting with Feyre, Vuldrin, we wished to know the outcome. Who was that you were speaking with?
Asked Tan, staring back across the busy platform with a frown. Frithha sighed.
Jahind again. It matters not. But Vuldrin. Enough, Tan, I am tired. Mistress!
Came the call, and Fritha whipped back to the eastern walkway to see a slave hurrying towards them, something about his face almost familiar.
Mistress, I have a message for you,
he announced as he reached them, his eyes flicking briefly over her face. Fritha was already on edge.
Well, speak it then.
The male smiled at her tone, dipping his head with a mock respect.
Forgive me, mistress, I must have misheard in the market today. I thought this female called Yuvaldrin, but that would make Yuvaldrin of Chednasad, the female who is rising to power within House Dispana.
Fritha just caught her wince.
And I was a guard for House Gwandar of Chednasad before I was captured by the Nathans and brought here as a slave, Mistress Vuldrin. Surely, you are much changed, though it must be said, it is a definite improvement.
Fritha felt her blood chill, the girl sparing a stiff glance to the others before asking the question he was just aching to hear.
What do you want?
The man smiled, everything was going exactly as he had planned.
I am a slave here, no better than you would have been had not the Spider Queen chosen to smile upon you. Well, now she smiles upon me. You will buy and release me, a free man to serve you in your retinue. Either that or I will expose you and earn my freedom that way.
Fritha held his gaze and, at last, nodded once, pointing to the walkway south that entwined a smaller of the city's stalactites and the stairs that led up to the next level.
Very well, but we cannot speak of this here,
she murmured, letting her eyes flick to the crowded platform next to them.
Come with me behind the stairwell there and we will discuss your terms.
The man's breath came in a sour rush as he laughed in her face.
Ha! Do you think me a fool? I think you are straining what little grace the Spider Queen may have bestowed to your worthless hide,
Fritha snarled, all the while surreptitiously unbuckling her sword to shift closer and slyly offer it to him.
Here. Take it. Now I am unarmed and you are not.
The male paused, no sign of war on his face as he clearly weighed the risks. Fritha waited just long enough for doubt to creep in.
Look, I will be out of the city from tonight and not returned for many days. If you wish to speak, we do it now.
She gestured to the walkway before them, the man eyeing it warily, before taking her sword to nod once. Anomen was frowning.
Vuldrin. Silence, male.
The pair walked off to disappear behind the great stone pillar. A moment later, and Fritha returned quite alone. Imoen watched the flames before her, the bright blue petals twisting and dancing to her will as she let her own magic merge with enchanted fire. She could feel the disapproval of the man sat on the chair behind her, but she ignored it. If Valigar was not used to the fact she was a mage by now, then that was his problem. Still, it was nice that he was there and she suspected he had arranged it to be so. Imoen rather fraught by the time Jahara and Anomen had finally agreed to go and look for her friend, and Valigar had taken it upon himself to come and wait in their common room with her. The others retired a while ago. The panic was over now. Jahara and Anomen had arrived back not long ago, informing them that they had met Fritha on her way back from her meeting, and that the girl was downstairs now having a drink. Their manner had been brusque though, a dark look flitting between them at the mention of her name, and Imoen wondered if Fritha had not been exercising her temper again. It was strange. Imoen wanted to feel sorry for the girl, but as much as the capacity was reduced within her, this Fritha did not feel much like her friend anyway. It was as though she was still waiting for the old Fritha, her Fritha to make an appearance, to rescue her from this impostor with a laugh and a grin. They had made up after their argument straight away, Fritha claiming she had not meant what she had hissed at her in that cold stone tunnel, but Imoen could not help but wonder if that was true, whether this resentment had not always been lurking in Frith's heart, suppressed by the soul that Irenicus had since stolen, and Imoen had felt out of sorts since, unable to shake the nagging guilt that perhaps she could have done something. She had not even attempted to escape from the asylum and, back in the dungeon, though it had not quite been the picture of liberty Fritha had painted, Imoen knew she had had more freedom than the others. Yet she had been so ensnared by her own fears, she had waited over a 10-day before moving against their captor, and only then because the dungeon had come under attack. How long would she have waited had that not forced her hand? Perhaps she had been relying on Fritha too much, but that was what friends did, wasn't it, lent upon each other in times of difficulty? Only now, it seemed, after so many crossed words, Fritha did not trust any of them enough to lean back. Imoen sighed, the fire before her no longer the entertainment it had once been, her newfound powers reminding her of some unwanted truths. She was a ballspawn now, just like Fritha, and yet this common ground had seemingly put more distance between them. Imoen was a ballspawn, yes, but Fritha was the ballspawn, and she hated how her friend played up her supposed divinity, because it just made the rift between them seem even greater. Imoen turned abruptly to the man behind her, ready for some distraction.
So, did you really kill your parents?
Valigar blinked once. She could tell she had surprised him even in this new face, perfect white eyebrows giving an involuntary quirk upwards, but he answered her all the same.
That is what Fritha said, is it not? Yeah, but she was pretty angry, so she could have just been putting that slant on it.
The man sighed, almost as though he wished it were so as he admitted,
No, I killed them. Why? Were they doing something wrong? I thought so at the time. There is a history of magic in my family, just as there is a history of the corruption and darkness such powers feed. To be fair, my father was already dead, I merely dispatched his animated corpse. My mother though. I killed her. But why?
Valigar shrugged.
She was mad and I believed her corrupted beyond redemption.
Imoen sent him an understanding smile.
Sounds like you're not so sure anymore. No. He admitted finally, no one is beyond redemption, but it takes the will to see it and their will to want it, and all must be balanced against the time it would take and the harm that could be done in the meantime. I made a mistake. I cannot correct it, I can only go forward conscious not to make it again. Oh, and don't forget protecting the world from evil mages like me,
she added with a grin. Valigar treated her to a rare smile.
That goes without saying.
Imoen laughed, turning back to the flames. She liked Valigar. He was calm and steady and did not lose his temper like everyone else seemed inclined at the moment, herself included. The rattle of the door handle, and Imoen whipped back to finally see her friend returned, safe though not entirely sound, one dark cheek painfully swollen and a large stone bottle clasped in her hand.
Hey, Fritha, you're back,
Imoen trilled, moving to sit on the sofa and pat the space next to her.
We were worried.
Fritha sighed, collapsing heavily at her side.
I was hardly gone long. No, but when Solafane turned up so unexpected, what did Feyre want?
The girl snorted darkly.
Someone to share in the blame. The beholder we oversaw the delivery of, it wasn't the right sort. The right sort for what?
Questioned Valigar.
For whatever they want it for. House Dispana has promised the Drow armies their greatest ally in the upcoming battle. And who is that?
Asked Imoen eagerly. Fritha shrugged.
Someone worth hanging on for, clearly, and the blood of an elder beholder or some other greater creature is the key to the alliance.
Imoen watched as she leaned back, Frithha raising the bottle for a long draught.
Should you be?
A look stopped her, Imoen continuing quickly, so,
what happened to your face?
Her friend paused, her eyes clouded with an unspoken distress as she lowered the bottle.
This act sometimes requires sacrifices.
Imoen felt a surge of frustration, Frithha always could play the martyr.
Well, maybe we could help, if you would let us come with you once in a while.
Frithha sighed and took another drink.
No, you are better off here waiting for someone else to get you out.
Imoen swallowed past the sting. She had asked for that, the girl forcing a smile and placing her hands over her ears as she sang,
La la la, be as mean as you like, cause I'm not listening.
Frithha let a half-smile curl her lips, the girl giving Imoen's white hair an affectionate flick.
Good, don't. I am best not listened to in moods like this. I'm going to bed. Good night, my pet.
Imoen watched her rise and leave, the weight her talk with Valigar had lifted now back in her stomach, dull and heavy.
My pet. It used to be friend. You know who she is starting to remind me of.
Valigar could guess, though he let her say it anyway. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at the closed door.
Feyre.
A no-man watched the fight that was coming to a close in the pit below him. The male was badly wounded, the deep gash across his shoulder and chest making his swings slow and clumsy. It was only a matter of time now, and his opponent knew it, the girl edging around him, a look of intense concentration upon her face that was disturbingly familiar. And she was not the only one, the crowds that had gathered around him watching the fight with the same intensity, a charged silence over them as they waited for the final blow. A no-man turned his back on the pit, letting his eyes scan the tavern behind him. Another day in the Underdark, everyone staying close to the tavern, bored and wary. It had been 3 days since their last task. Frithha describing to them her meeting with Feyre and Matron Argelis and their group had been on leave at the inn ever since. At least, Frithha had had the occasional visit to Feyre to break up the days, the rest of them stuck in that tavern day after day, not even their subtle inquires left to break the tedium. Frithha had ordered no more mention of dragons or eggs since they had learned of Feyre's involvement, the girl reluctant to arouse any suspicions and make an enemy of the only ally they had in that city. As for the others, Jaehaera was up in their suite as usual. She could rarely bear the crowds of the tavern, though Minsk, Valigar, and Imoen were all sat about the table in the far corner, talking quietly as they nursed their drinks. Ari and Herdalis had been with them earlier, the pair joining Frithha in some of the Ustnathan favorites. Their trio sat on the other side of their table singing about the glory of destroying your enemies and sating carnal desires. Before Ari and Herdalis had retired, Imoen joking that all that singing about the lust chambers had inspired a visit. And, for a while, Frithha had seemed just as bored as the rest of them, until an hour or so ago, the female who had propositioned him the other day arriving with 2 men to challenge one of Frithha's males to a duel. But Frithha was not willing to let this chance for some entertainment pass her by, and took up the contest herself. The male she had agreed to battle had yielded soon enough, and Frithha had been fighting in the pit ever since, and seemingly thoroughly enjoying herself, testing her blade against the few challengers who had been foolish enough to try and earn a little glory facing Despina's new favored female, the girl reveling in her newfound skill and the adulation of the growing crowd after each bloody victory. A no-man glanced back down to her, the girl circling her opponent and waiting for the opening that would end the thing. She was tensed, every muscle ready to react to the slightest movement, her eyes watching the male opposite as he readied himself for that final stab at glory or death. What a change in a girl who would have once been so horrified by such needless violence. He had questioned her about it in between bouts, the girl sparing him her usual contempt to give an even shrug.
They called it, I don't start fights, Tan, I just finished them.
Helm's mercy, the girl he loved was dying before his very eyes. Movement in the pit snapped his attention back to the fight, the male feinting forward, thrusting low only to sweep his blade up at the last moment, a ruse Frithafel for though it did him no good. Her sword still low, she leaned back, using the unbalance in her stance to roll her body closer, under his guard, and the small crowd of spectators roared as she slipped her blade up under his sternum, blood spattering the sand beneath. A no-man sighed, he should have just yielded when he had had the chance.
I see your mistress is providing fair entertainment for the rest of us.
Solafane smiled slightly as the male he now recognized as Tan glanced up, hoping to indicate his comment had been a friendly one. But the man merely scowled at him, and Solafane turned his attentions back to the pit where Vuldren was enjoying the applause, looking commanding and glorious, one hand still held aloft as she shook back her hair and sheathed her sword with a flourish.
She fights hungrily. I have seen many of her skill before, but few of her thirst. She truly savors each victory.
The girl found them in the sea of faces to flash Solafane a grin and a wink, and next to him Tan shifted, his face set. Solafane was popular enough to recognize that resentment.
You were her favored once, were you not?
Tan glanced to him sharply, frowning again, though seemingly more from confusion than anger, and Solafane elaborated.
She favored you above the other males of her company, yes.
He had asked out of a sense of commiseration, but his question was not taken so.
I will not speak of this with you,
Tan muttered, turning back to the pit to open the gate as Vuldren tripped up the steps towards them.
Still sulking, Tan?
She questioned brightly as she stepped through the gateway, her face shining with her exertions and her victory both.
Now, do not let your brooding color Solafane's good humor.
Solafane nodded his greeting.
You fight well. You should see me dance,
she laughed teasingly, giving the gash on her arm an indifferent poke.
He was better than the last few, at least. But how about a duel, Solafane? It need not be to the death. I fear I save my blade for my enemies only.
Her smile was gone in an instant, her sigh tired and heavy with ennui.
Feyre is right, you are dull. But our mistress has a task for us, yes.
Solafane nodded stiffly, her insult slight enough to pass, but not without a sting.
She would have you meet her.
Vuldren, called the voice that was always sure to put his teeth on edge, and Solafane glanced around to see her saunter into the tavern. Feyre. She was smiling, sanguine and broad, everyone looking round at her entrance. She was a powerful female in that city and they all knew it, females watching her pass with covetous eyes, while the males seemed to straighten, striving to be noticed without actually being seen to invite her attentions and presuming enough to earn them a trip to the handmaidens.
Vuldren, I am pleased to see you are enjoying your rest time.
Feyre glanced pointedly to the bloody pit where two attendants were clearing away the latest body.
And so fruitfully too. And Solafane is here as well? How unusual, I thought you preferred to spend your free time sulking in your chambers.
Solafane felt the old hatred rear back.
Of course I am here. You sent me to bring Vuldren to you. Yes, and then I decide to come myself, male, so mind your tone. We will take a table.
Vuldren nodded politely, leading them over to the table where her companions were already seated, the girl calling for more drinks as she, Solafane and Feyre took their seats.
So this is your group then?
Feyre continued once they were all settled, her pale blue eyes traveling over those about her.
Indeed, I recognize some of them from my rescue, though not all of them appear to be here. The others are in the lust chambers,
offered the young Hallua with a grin. Feyre raised an eyebrow.
Oh, Do you often let others speak for you, Vuldren?
Halua dipped her face as Vuldren sent her a very cold look.
No, I do not. But she speaks the truth, however out of turn. A pity,
sighed Feyre, looking anything but disappointed by the trouble she was stirring.
I recall one with such a tousled shock of hair who was very pleasing to look upon. Still, your other males seem capable enough.
Feyre smiled, letting her eyes rake keenly over the three men sat about her. Vuldren merely shrugged.
They serve their purpose.
Solafane watched the males. He would have expected them to be eagerly encouraging the attentions of a powerful female such as Feyre, but all kept their gazes fixed firmly on the table. Vuldren had a tight hold on them, it seemed. This lack of interest had clearly irritated Feyre, the woman's tone suddenly brusque as she returned her attention to Vuldren.
Well, enough of this. My spies have reported back with intelligence indicating that there may be 3 suitable sources for the elder blood we require, from the creatures that hold territories neighboring onto our own. The nearest beholder warrens apparently have an elder orb residing within them. One of the Kuo-Toa tribes are under the rule of the Mad Prince who will serve just as well and, of course, the Illithid city to the east have their hive mind. Here are maps showing the locations. The closest is half a day's travel from here, though it will undoubtedly take longer to infiltrate the place.
Feyre placed the scroll of Velam into Vuldren's waiting hands, her manner grave.
You know what is required, Vuldren, and what is expected of you.
Vuldren nodded once.
Tan, Nidren, go and fetch the others, we leave within the hour.
End of chapter.